People often ask, well, what is HVAC? How big is HVAC? And what is HVAC like? What does HVAC mean? So we're going to cover some of that right here. And HVAC simply stands for H, heating, V, ventilation, AC for air conditioning, and the R is for refrigeration. But HVAC goes much more beyond that. You hear people talk about it being commercial, residential, industrial, distribution, things like that, but still it goes so much farther than that. I wrote down a list of different HVAC specialties, but these also transfer to multiple different sides of the categories. For example, management can be management residential, commercial, distribution, all the way through. So a lot of these, even though I'm going through one list, they'd really double, triple, even quadruple through the different categories. Sometimes I talk to people about training, and they'll say, I don't need training. I've been doing this for 25 years. Well, I started doing this back in 1995, working with my dad after school in a sheet metal shop. So I've been doing it for a while too, and I tell you, there's a lot I have to learn. And I love this trade because there is still so much more to learn. You can never learn it all. And the learning side of life is the growing side of life. Never stop learning. So let's go through just some of these positions so you get an idea how big HVAC is. So we got management that fits through multiple different categories. We got sales, we got marketing. You can specialize in just marketing. There's people in HVAC marketing all over the place. You got a great product, a great service, you got to be able to get that service, that information out there. Service and repair, that's a big one, but now there's people that just simply diagnose. They diagnose a system and somebody else comes out and replaces it. This is through for commercial, industrial, and residential. There's a lot of people now, there's not enough people in HVAC, so a lot of companies now are hiring somebody just to do the diagnostics. And as they do the diagnostics, somebody else comes out and changes out the parts. You also got technical support. You don't have enough knowledge, not enough brain power in this field anymore. A lot of people are cutting corners, so tech support's huge. More and more people are calling tech support now than ever. Like, hey, I got this problem, I got this information. So tech support's been a huge industry in HVAC. Different manufacturers have them. Even some private companies have their own tech support line. Techs can call in and, hey, I need help, I need answers. So if they know the basics, they understand the refrigeration cycle, they understand the vocabulary, that technical support guy can walk them the rest of the way through that. We also have installers. All this equipment that's being sold has to be installed. Whether it's industrial, residential, no matter what it is, we have to be able to install that equipment, and people need to be able to specialize in that installation. Installation itself is its own quite big specialty. Residential, there's a difference between people who enjoy doing the residential installations versus, say, the service or the sales. It's its own specialty. Customer service representative, CSRs, these are huge in HVAC. When that phone rings, somebody has to be able to answer that phone and be able to get that customer's information and put that into a database or be able to get that information that's going to be usable for the companies. Whether it's for a smaller HVAC company, a huge HVAC company, manufacturers, all the way through, that customer service representative is important. That's the first voice, the first face they see with that company. Some businesses still have where you walk into a business, that customer service representative, that's the first face that greets you. Hi, welcome to blank blank services. That's an important side of HVAC. Dispatchers is very important too. They're going to take that information from the customer service rep, all this information's in the computer, all these calls that are flooding in, and they have to figure out who's going to take what call, who's certified for what call better, who is going to be closer to this next call, who's going to be better for the next sales if it's that kind of call. So the dispatcher is able to see where everybody is in an entire city and distribute those employees, those technicians, service techs, runners, all these different places where they need them throughout the entire city. But it also applies into commercial and also industrial, manufacturing. Dispatch is a very important side of that, where these people are going to be. We also got home performance. This is one of my favorite parts of HVAC right now. There is so much to learn about home performance. It's really home science, it's building science is what it is, but specifically for the home side of it, there's so much about in the air and the people that live in it, the quality of the air, the heat load calculations, the different types of chemicals that are used in the house and how we heat and cool the house. So there's people that specialize in home performance, being able to make sure that house is using the least amount of energy as possible and the occupants are the most comfortable and the healthiest of all. Home performance is massive. We're going to do some classes on that, just introductory classes, bringing you up to that. But that's something you can spend your whole life never learning everything about it. When we get there, we're going to add links and information so that you can start exploring that if that's something you're interested in doing. Energy auditing is a new one. That's a really big one now, to where you go out and just simply find out how much energy use the house is going to be. Now there's different certifications that go with the energy auditors, such as HERS raters, and in commercial you get a whole bunch of different styles. But before we'd buy a house and it's just, oh, these have pretty cabinets, but now we can look at a house and be like, hey, here's how much energy it's using. Like if you're going to buy a car, one of the things you look for, the miles per gallon. Well, we can kind of put a miles per gallon in a house, at least to give you an idea. This house is using a lot more energy than this house is going to be using. It's a big part of HVAC now, as well as we have green building. Green building, making sure the house is going to be environmentally sound as possible, using as least impact on the environment. Things like this, but there's also a commercial side of it called LEEDs, special certifications just for green buildings. Indoor air quality is huge. We spend so much time breathing so many gallons of air. I have to look up the number, but we breathe a huge amount of air in all the time. We're concerned about the quality of the water and the food, but nobody's thinking about the quality of the air we're breathing. There's a lot of people out wanting to sell little products that just magically make the air clean, but there's so much more that goes into indoor air quality than these little gimmick things. We're going to do a special class just on indoor air quality. Now we got VFR and VRV for variable refrigerant flow and variable refrigerant volume. These classes are huge now. Before we just had a compressor that ran one speed. Now we got compressors that's multiple stages. Runs a high stage and a secondary stage, and then these VRVs and the VRVs, those are so cool because the compressor speeds up and slows down. It's like the car being able to speed up and slow down. Well, these are able to change the load, and they're not like your grandfather's air conditioner anymore. These operate completely different. You got control boards, you got a whole lot of more science and math that goes in there. So these are specialties now, and a lot of the older techs, they refuse to learn about this stuff because it's too different, it's too overwhelming. So especially coming into the trade, that's something you can focus on. We also have air test and balance. I've had several of my students get out into the field and they love this. Other people try to do it and they absolutely hate it. But air test and balance is really cool. You're working with numbers. When they design a building and they put all the building together, they say, hey, we need this much CF film in this room, we need this much CF film of air in this room. Test and balance goes out and makes sure that they're getting that CF film in the room. They're testing the equipment, the installation. They're making sure that equipment's doing what it's designed to do. They're making sure the installer did what he said he was going to do, and they're delivering those CF films. And then they adjust that system. They're making sure that system is set and performing like it's supposed to. So air test and balance, we call this TAB. That's a very important part of HVAC. As well as they get building commissioning, where you check a whole lot more than just the air. You check the water pressure and the building pressures. A whole lot goes into it. So commissioning is big. They put a baseline out for what the equipment's doing. It's awesome. And now there's also sound and vibration within that. It's not new. It's actually been around for a long time. But how much vibration is going to the duct system? How much vibration is that equipment putting out? The volume of the air as it's rattling through. What are these effects? What are the long-term effects? How those vibrations are going to affect people? There's a huge specialty in just sound and vibration. I got some students that are now getting into those certifications. That's something a lot of people don't even know about. As well as inspectors. We got all this equipment out, and inspectors make sure they study these codes. They make sure that the equipment matches at least the bare minimum codes. So you got people that go out and know the codes, and inspectors that start looking to see, hey, is this company at least doing it to the bare minimum standards? The inspector is a very part of HVAC. Quality control is a big one. Whether you're in manufacturing or you're in just the residential business, if your technicians aren't installing it right, your installers aren't putting it in right, there's no quality control. There's no way to know if the job's been doing right or not until you get a call back from the customer. It could be a few years later. So having this quality control people come around is very important. It's a very overlooked part of HVAC, as they try to cut costs a lot of times. They try to cut costs with the quality control, and usually it comes back to bite them later, or it costs them more in that reputation. It's a really important part of it. Some of the smaller ones require their own techs to do quality control, but still, it's very important. Multi-family housing is a big one. You talk about apartment complex or these big buildings where multiple families are living in these houses. Well, they got to be comfortable too. A ton of energy, ton of cost that goes with that. So multi-family housing has a ton of people that work there. Some people start out in multi-family housing because all the units are almost exactly the same, and they can practice what they know on those exact same units, kind of build their confidence before they move on to other sectors. Some multifamily housing has really high standards, and some of them just, hey, make it blow cold air, but there's a huge variety in multifamily. I got a friend of mine that's worked his whole life in multifamily, and he's a specialist in knowing how to do more than just HVAC, patching walls and plumbing stuff. So multifamily can be huge, or specifically just on the HVAC side, which is still big enough as it is. Then we got heat load calculations. We're going to put an air conditioner in a house. We don't just guess. There's these people that talk about rules of thumb, which is the same thing as a guess, but really has a lot that goes into that. How much insulation's in the house, the color of the roof, the overhang of the roof, how thick the walls are going to be, and how much air is moving through those walls. It's a huge overlooked one for people that do heat load calculations. So the house, how many people live in the house, what temperature they like their house set at, the climate that that house is in. So heat load calculations, there's people that specialize in just doing heat load calculations. And also system selections. Once you size that unit for the house, you got to make sure the the system you're putting in is the right system. A lot of people don't know that a 3-ton unit from brand A and a 3-ton unit from brand B will not operate the same in different environments. So system selection helps you select the correct system for that heat load calculation to make sure it's handling the humidity and the temperature. Some people just want to slap a system in there, but system selection is very important. A lot of times the people that learn this also learn the system selection as well. It's called ACCA Manual S for selection, as heat load calculations is ACCA Manual J. We also got duct design. Duct design is its own specialty. You got duct design in commercial, duct design in residential, duct design for flex system, and yes, there are high performance flex systems, duct design for metal systems, duct design for square duct systems, duct design for round duct, oval duct, spiral duct, all different kinds of duct systems out there that you can specialize in. So even duct design has multiple different ones. But we think about air needing to move, and even if you have 2 different pipes, the fittings of those pipes are very different at how they move air and how much air they move and the pressure. So duct design is a specialty. Some people go out and just, oh, we're going to stick a pipe here and there, and you have these beautiful air conditioners that never work right because they never had somebody doing the duct design. Duct installation, people that install it all, where they specialize with sheet metal systems and building sheet metal transitions and sheet metal duct versus multiple different types of ducts that are out there, being able to install that duct fast and as efficiently as possible where it still works correctly. Duct installation is a very important part of it. I started out installing duct systems, killer on my knees, but I was fast doing it and I knew that it was interesting, and that got me started in HVAC. Duct testing and diagnostics. Just because the duct's there and just because somebody designed it to be hooked up a certain way doesn't mean that that duct's carrying the right amount of air or has the right amount of static pressure. These ducts are going to have a pressure which is like the blood pressure in the body. They always go to a doctor, they check your blood pressure, but we need to be checking the duct pressure too. That duct pressure gets too high and it starts wearing against the equipment. The equipment itself doesn't work right, all because of duct work. You hear people selling new equipment, but if that duct system isn't tested, isn't checked to go with that system, it'll never work right. So duct testing and duct diagnostics is a part of HVAC. There's people that specialize in just that. They spent their whole career in specializing duct testing, duct diagnostics, and duct design, as well as system commissioning. You put in that brand new unit, is it working correct? And do you know anything to compare it to later? So now when you install a new system, we have different processes for system commissioning, from residential, commercial, industrial, that we put a baseline of data. When we start the system up, here's how it's working. Here's what it's doing right now. You're going to hear me talk about a program called MeasureQuick many times, that MeasureQuick is one program that makes system commissioning a whole lot faster. You hear some people that hear that say there's so much into that because they've never done it before, but system commissioning is so important. So a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, we can look back and see, how did that data compare? When we install that system, instead of saying, yeah, it's up and running, we now have a data point that says, no, it's up and running and it's working correctly. So it's system commissioning. Obviously we have air conditioning. Air conditioning is going to be conditioning air, but not just for people, not just for comfort, but also manufacturing processes. When Willis Carrier first invented AC, it was for the printing system, for the paper, because of how humidity affected that paper. So air conditioning itself isn't just people. A lot of different things are also using air conditioning. So if you live in Las Vegas in the middle of summer, air conditioning is pretty darn important. Then we have heat pumps. Heat pumps its own specialty, where we take heat in the wintertime, we take heat from outside and bring that heat inside. A lot of people don't understand heat pumps. Later we're going to be doing a class on just heat pumps to help you understand that bigger picture of heat pumps, as well as gas furnaces, gas heating. There's a lot of technology that goes into gas furnaces, as well as a lot of safety points that are overlooked with gas furnaces. Tons of technology in these new gas furnaces and how they work. So gas furnaces is its own specialty, as well as oil furnaces. Oil furnaces are completely different than gas furnace. How they work, the safety aspect, the tools you need to work on them. So oil furnaces have its own specialty within heating. And then we also have combustion analysis. Any house has any type of burning appliance. Ideally, you want to have somebody at some point with a combustion analysis certification coming in and checking to make sure that gas furnaces, those appliances are burning correctly, to make sure that the house is going to be safe, to make sure that the air coming in to have that gas to burn with is appropriate for the system, to make sure we're not backdrafting. So combustion analysis is its own specialty, as well as carbon monoxide. There's people that spent their entire life, like Bob Dwyer, that's been studying carbon monoxide his whole life and training people and trying to protect people for carbon monoxide. We also have people that's been spending their whole life studying carbon monoxide and trying to keep people safe from it. When you enter a house, how the technician themselves are safe. So carbon monoxide has its own specialty. A lot of the sensors we use, there's a lot more detail that goes into just a carbon monoxide alarm. People think, oh, I put this alarm up here, I'm safe. But they're not. There's so much that goes into it. That's its own specialty. Hydronics is a specialty. We're going to be heating water and we're going to be sending that heat through the water. So hydronics, I can heat the floor with hydronics or the walls or entire buildings. So hydronics is huge, from residential through industrial. Hydronics is a big side of it, as well as heat pumps. This is supposed to be geothermal heat pumps, where we're going to take heat from the earth and move that heat from the earth into the house. And then in the wintertime, we take heat from the house and put it back in the earth. What's cool is once you get that system running, you take heat from the summertime and you put it into the earth, and then in the winter, you take that heat back out of the earth and put it back into the house. So the systems for geothermal heat pumps actually get more efficient over time. Huge cost in installing it, but once it's there, maintaining it's a whole lot easier. So geothermal is its own specialty within heat pumps. And then also we have appliances. I got a friend of mine spent most of his career working on appliances. A massive amount of technology that goes into appliances. And appliances vary dramatically from one year to the next, from 1 month to the next. There's so much technology that goes into appliances, so many more unique parts that are in appliances alone. But appliances is essentially part of HVAC. And we have inventory control. Whether you're an appliance company, an air conditioning company, a manufacturer, a distributor, knowing the products you have. When I worked for companies, we had to every quarter or sometimes every year, we had to go through and inventory our service fans, and we had to go inventory the warehouse at the shop, keep track of what we had and what we didn't have. As if we got a customer and they want a new system and we got a sales rep that goes out there to sell them a new system, we got to make sure we have that system or the availability of that system. So knowing what we have is important. Knowing what you have on your service fan when you're going to do repairs is important. If I'm going to go drive out of town a long distance, I want to make sure I'm going to have the general parts I need. I look at that service call and try to think of what may be the possibilities and make sure in my van I have that inventory that I need before I drive all the way out there. If I drive all the way out there and have to drive all the way back, oh, we all lose. Quality control, there's again, it's so important to make sure the stuff's being done right. A lot of people don't have that quality control. Let's look also at chilled water, chilled systems, where we take heat from the water and we move heat to the air. So that's a water to air chillers. Lots of these commercial buildings are cooled with chillers. There's not enough room for all these little condensing units up on the roof, so they put this chilled water system in there so they can have a water system through the whole entire building. So they take the heat from the air, move it to the water, heat from the water, move it back to the air outside. But we also have water-to-water chillers, where we take heat from the water and put it in a different set of water. We send that water to the roof and reject the heat out of that water separately on the roof. On top of that, you can specialize in just one brand of chiller. How a Carrier or Train chiller works will be different how a York chiller or some other brand works. Chillers are always running in the summertime. We do chiller maintenance in the wintertime. Boilers are running in the wintertime. We do boiler maintenance in the summertime. One time I thought I wanted to be a boiler tech, so I went out with the boiler crew and started doing this retube. I thought, this is awesome, big old giant equipment, powerful, rah, rah, rah. At the end of the day, I realized, man, my arms are hurting, I'm covered in soot, I'm cut everywhere, bleeding, and I stink horribly. I was like, man, I'm gonna leave it to you guys. But boiler makers is its own specialty. They're called boiler makers. How cool is that? They got their own name within it. Some places have specialties just to get that certification, and you have to have people sign off for it. So boilers and boiler makers is part of the industry. From residential boilers all the way to industrial. Then we have breweries. Breweries is a HVAC part specializing in the refrigeration. Some beer has to be brewed at a very precise temperature. And these people can tell if the temperature of that beer is outside that parameter because the taste will entirely change. Later we're going to talk about some of the history of HVAC, and breweries plays a big part of that. So that's important. Also the distribution of that beer. Some beer has to be kept at a certain temperature as it's sent across the country. And also beer draft systems. That's a big part of HVAC as well. That beer has to be stored in a walk-in cooler, and then it has to be chilled down to the right temperature before it hits the faucet. If that beer is not the right pressure and the right temperature, you find out that the beer systems comes out foamy or the wrong taste or the wrong consistency. Different beers have different pressures they set at. So draft systems, there's people in HVAC that specialize in draft systems. Airlines, every time you go to an airport and you're sitting on a plane before the engines run, they have these portable AC systems that run out and hook to that. All of the airports have their own AC systems, very special how those systems work, as well as the airlines itself on the planes. They have their own air conditioning system, the reverse Brighton effect. It's very cool how those systems work, but it's also HVAC. Then we talk about manufacturing. All these parts that we have to be able to manufacture. All these HVAC equipment, there's manufacturing facilities, and they also have the sales and service and diagnostic and tech support, but manufacturing is huge. There's not enough people really qualified to work in some of these manufacturing plants. So we have a huge shortage of HVAC parts right now. So manufacturing is a very big part of it, as well as the manufacturing design. They got these equipments. How do we design the equipment? How do we make these parts better? How do we design these parts? The engineering side of that. Technical writing. You got all these specialists that make these parts and design it and do all this test, but now you got to get somebody to put that information down in writing so the person at the end can look at that data and see, hey, here's how I need to fix this, or here's the name of these parts. Here's how we go order it from the supply house, or here's how this is supposed to work so they can get patents. Technical writing goes way beyond that. Also books and all this stuff, that's all technical writing. Just like I'm talking to you now, technical writers are able to talk to you, but they're able to translate from technical jargon so that you can understand that information, just like somebody can translate from me to Spanish. And also we have product development. We have products out there. How do we make those products better? So they got to go hear from people in the field, take that information and apply it to improve these products or make their own new products. As well as engineering, being able to engineer. Engineering has its own specialty. They go to school for a ton of time learning how much PSI a screw will hold, and how much pressure all these different components will hold, and how much PSI on an elbow can it hold with this thickness of copper, as well as for every BTU of every refrigerant, how many pounds of heat it's moving as it changes state. There's tons of it. Engineering goes into the weight of air and so many specialties in engineering. It's a beautiful side of it. And then we have product manufacturing, to where talking about not just manufacturing itself, but manufacturing of certain products. As we make things through this country and throughout the entire world, some stuff has to be kept at a very precise temperature during its manufacturing process. Some things are heated up and have to be cooled down at a certain rate or a certain speed so that it works correctly. So the HVAC side of our products or manufacturing, that is very, very important. And then we also have training and education. All this new stuff, new technology, we got to be able to train other people to be able to work on it. We got to be able to train people for all these different aspects. And then also wholesale and supply. All this stuff is manufactured. We got to take that in, all these parts, and have it available. So the technician in the field or the installers, all these other people can come in and get those parts and take those parts back out to the field. So wholesale has all these other things really tied into that as well. Part of the HVAC, I got friends that spent their whole entire career in the wholesale and the supply company, that side of it. And you can work at the bottom and all the way to the top on just the wholesale side. Parts distribution kind of falls into wholesale, but we got all these parts all over the place. We got to get them to where they want. We also got in there, we got sales reps. We got representatives that take all these different parts and go to the supply house and says, hey, well, I need you to start stocking these parts, and here's why. Here's how it's going to be beneficial to you, and here's how it's beneficial to your customers. But right now, there's not enough parts, so the parts distribution's been under a lot of strain. As they get these parts, how as quickly possible get them where they need to go. Some parts are made overseas, and you got to plan that ahead of time. Hey, if I order 10,000 of these right now, when are they going to be ready? And you got to plan for the summer season or plan for the winter season so that you can get those parts where they need to go. Let's not forget food processing. Gosh, there's so many different aspects of food processing, from the canning system all the way to peas. How they freeze peas is beautiful. They send and freeze each individual pea. So when you have a bag of peas, they don't stick together. There's tons of HVAC in food processing, tons of refrigeration, and they got to keep that food cool as they transport it across the world. We have like 7 or 8 billion people in the world. It's only possible because of transportation and refrigeration. So food processing is massive. Even some of the farms now, they have their own food processing system to maintain the temperature of the food as they harvest it before it even goes to the food processor. So food processing is big. Cold storage, after they get all this product in one place, how they have to keep it chilled as they distribute it through the country. So cold storage, massive warehouse they keep cool. Some places are so big inside, the whole building is frozen, so they have forklifts running inside, electric forklifts moving all around, products around to the different trucks. So cold storage is a big part of that. And also restaurant hot work is one. As they cook, all the stoves, everything that burns, anything with a fire in it, that's called the hot work side. There's people that specialize in just that. A company called Hobart that's really big on the hot side. There's tons of different other companies as well, but hot side is its own specialty. And also you got restaurant ventilation. As you're cooking all this food, all that smoke and stuff has to go somewhere. So they have a ventilation system that pulls it out. But as you pull the air out of that restaurant, you got to make the air back up. Otherwise you put it in negative pressure. So you're having to put air back into the building to make sure that's balanced. There's people that specialize in simply restaurant ventilation, as well as restaurant units. So all these little under cabinets, little reach-in freezers, salad coolers, All these different refrigeration stuff is huge, as well as the cold storage for restaurants, all their walk-in freezers, walk-in coolers, tons and tons of refrigeration. Think about your freezer. If you were to lose your freezer today, your appliance went out, then how much money would you lose to replace all the stuff in there? Well, imagine a restaurant losing their freezer. They didn't just lose thousands and thousands of dollars in food, they also lost a product they need to sell the next day. How can I make money as a restaurant when I have no food to sell? Let's think of supermarkets, massive industry in supermarkets. There's so much in supermarkets, I can't even begin to pinpoint. You have rack systems and you got massive coolers. Next time you go to a Costco or a big warehouse, look at how those rooms are cooled. Then go to a smaller supermarket and see how all the little freezers, and look at where all the refrigerant lines go. Supermarkets has its own specialty. Then go over to the produce side and see how all that's kept at a different temperature and how those systems work. And then you go over and see those reach-in units. All of that is supermarket, and all of those are different specialties within the supermarket system. And system monitoring, especially supermarkets use system monitoring a lot. They can evaluate all of the equipment so they can see if there's going to be a problem before it actually becomes a problem. Hey, we're about to lose all this ice cream. Get somebody over there to move it to another freezer, and let's get somebody out there right now so we don't lose that product. But system monitoring is also used for restaurants and cold storage, and even residential systems now have system monitoring. A lot of this is computerized, but they can monitor these systems and look for problems before they become a bigger problem. We can also monitor indoor air quality systems as well for commercial buildings and for residential. There's people that specialize in system monitoring, whether they're sitting behind a computer waiting for a problem to happen, or they're simply designing the stuff or installing the stuff or tech support for the stuff. So system monitoring is a huge thing that wasn't even around when I was first starting in this trade. Then we got custard and ice cream, how they make ice cream, tons of technology in that. But every time you go to a restaurant and you get that custard or that soft serve, there's a massive amount of technology that goes into that appliance at those places. It is its own specialty. Got to work in some Stalting units recently. It's absolutely beautiful how those systems work. Once you understand the basics, it's still the same theory applies, but you can specialize in simply one brand of custard machines. Lots and lots of technology there. And parts delivery. You think if you have an AC guy and you have a very well-paid AC guy, you don't want him sitting at the supply house, sitting there eating donuts and drinking coffee while he's waiting on these parts. Driving over to the supply house, waiting for the parts, driving back is a huge cost. So what you can do is have a parts delivery person go get those parts to the supply house, bring them to that job for the technician or for the next person installing those parts. It makes the company a lot more efficient. Had a lot of students that worked in parts delivery while they were learning HVAC or while they went to school so they could get a better feel of what the vocabulary and things like that are, how the company works. So a lot of companies will start people off in parts delivery to get them familiar with that. Plus, think of the installation. Instead of having your install team go sit at a supply house, you can have the parts delivery person gather everything they need and have it at the warehouse ready to go. So now the install crew can pick that equipment up and be going. Now if they run into a problem, they have a parts runner, parts delivery person bring those parts to them, saves them a ton of time. Also look at transportation by rail. We have all this product across the country and we're shipping it by rail. So as we do that, if we have produce or different foods, different meats, everything has different temperatures, having refrigerated rail cars is important, keeping the product the correct temperature as we ship it across the country. But not only that, think about people. Think about a New York subway system in the middle of summer or in the middle of winter. If you want to be on a train full of people and also be sweating to death in the summer or in the wintertime be freezing to death. So having that HVAC systems on those rail systems are very, very important as well. Transportation by truck. This can be 18-wheelers. They have their own special refrigeration systems for 18-wheelers. And now that's growing. Now, before you had gas-powered systems and systems that ran on either propane or diesel fuel and had generators. Some of them actually running an engine itself, but now they're running on battery packs. I see now they're putting solar panels in the cross to the top of these refrigeration units so they can use some of that energy to offset some of the idling engines that's running all the time. But transportation by truck is big, but also let's think about the smaller delivery trucks. They got their own refrigeration system too. They go get all of this produce, they take it to the restaurants. Those refrigeration systems have to be maintained also. So that transport by truck is big. And let's think about sea containers. As we ship product all over the world back and forth, we need to be able to have some of this product maintained at the correct temperature. So how these sea containers work, they have their own refrigeration equipment on them. They're insulated boxes, and those systems are key. And there's tons of different ways those work and tons of different refrigerants in it. You can specialize in just that, but there's also ships that are built for certain refrigeration equipment, like bulk types of systems that keep produce inside or different foods inside without sea containers. They have their own refrigeration equipment. On those sea containers, as we ship product across the country, there's also crew on board, and they a lot of times have their own refrigeration systems and cooling systems on board. Captain wants to be nice and comfortable. He's sitting up there all day going over these charts and everything. But let's also think those people have to eat. Essentially, kitchens or galleys on board of these ships. So you're going to have all your stuff with your restaurant systems are going to be tied to that as well. I got to work on a boat for a few weeks, and man, that's a lot of work. And it's different because everything is moving all the time. So it's different on design. The same refrigeration cycle applies, but there's so much more that goes to it than that. So the maritime is massive. Now also let's look at ships. Let's think of cruise lines. You got a cruise line, all those people on board, they want to be comfortable, plus they're all eating as well. All the beer systems, all the restaurant systems, all this cooling that goes into effect, cold storage, all the stuff on these boats is a big part of it. But also you got mansions. People have these billions of dollar mansions that they just get to have to travel around in, and they need their own refrigeration as well, also for the same food and people comforts. But then you have smaller stuff like your fishing vessels is another big one. When they harvest all this fish, they got to keep that fish at a correct temperature. As soon as that fish dies, it starts putting out bacteria, so they have to immediately ice that fish so they can keep it fresh when they take it back to the docks and they sell it. So fishing vessels have their own refrigeration systems on board, as well as, depending on how long they're out for, how they take care of the crew. Then also down to your small houseboats. I got a friend that lives in a houseboat, and he never even leaves dock. He stays on that dock all the time, but he literally lives on the houseboat. And he says, man, when the AC goes out, he doesn't always need the cooling. He can handle the heat, but the humidity is the killer. So the houseboats, even down to that little stuff, and how a houseboat HVAC system is installed is completely different. So people that work on these systems have to be able to get in the very tight areas. Sometimes you get a residential person trying to work on a boat, and it's like, I don't even know what to do, and they give up and quit. So the houseboats is a part of HVAC as well. Let's also look at cryogenics. A lot of times we think of Walt Disney being in suspended animation, but cryogenics is so much bigger than that. Sometimes we use cryogenics with food or industrial systems. We use it for maintaining viruses or cold storage for a long time for certain types of things to keep them in suspended animation, or to study different things. We'll put them in cryogenics to where there is no more decay in them. So cryogenics is, and also more about the medical systems. You also, hospitals got to be kept the right temperature and air ventilation, especially if the contagious conditions in a hospital. You got to be able to have some rooms positively pressured and some rooms are negative pressure, and special ventilation systems that go with that. But even think bigger than that. Think about blood. When you have your blood drawn, it has to be kept a very, very precise temperature. Those have alarms on them, so they got to have somebody to come out immediately when those alarms go off to save that blood, because you can't just go in, oh, let's get a new shipment of blood. Plus diseases. People that study diseases and study viruses, they keep these at the right temperature. I got to work at one hospital. They called me and said, hey, we got this system down. We need you out here right now. And it's really creepy when you're looking at it. It's got all these names of these viral infections on this door. I'm thinking, man, please tell me that none of this virus is still around when I open this door up. So it really makes you think twice. But medical systems is big. There's so much even more that goes into it than just that. But let's give an example of MRI machines. MRI machines use helium to keep it cool. So helium's the refrigerant for MRI machines. Huge electromagnets, tons of heat. You can have your whole career specializing in just MRI systems. CO2 systems, very popular in across Europe and across Canada and even in the US. CO2 systems are used in supermarket applications, industrial applications. But CO2, you think of a block of ice, that's CO2. But we can also have it liquid and vapor form. So CO2 is big. And ammonia, the RETA, the RETA certification for ammonia is big. When I came into HVAC, ammonia was out. So don't even worry about ammonia. Now ammonia is making this huge comeback. Had a lot of benefits in ammonia that we didn't realize before. So there's a school in Colorado that specializes in just ammonia system, maybe more across the country. I don't know, but ammonia has its own specialty. And think of ice rinks. Now Las Vegas has the Vegas Golden Knights. They have an ice rink in the middle of the desert. I mean, that's not refrigeration. What is? I mean, how cool is that? An ice rink in the desert where there's no water and there's no ice. So we can make that happen. But you think about the cost of that, how that has to be maintained, service, the quality of the water, to make sure the whole entire ice is frozen just exact and just precise all the time. And if they have an issue with ice, it's not like, oh, look, we need to just reschedule this game. It doesn't happen. They'd be losing so much money. It'd just be unbelievable. So ice rinks is its own specialty. People specialize in ice rinks, and that's a pretty cool job, right? Then we have also server rooms. Lots of companies, they have all these server rooms that process data, move information constantly, and also save data. For every watt of power, that's 3.413 BTUs of heat energy. So all this energy that we're using to process data, that's converted to heat. We got to do something with that heat. We got to get the heat out of that room someplace else. So data, or these server rooms, are a big part of HVAC. But not only that, they have to be kept a lower temperature than you and me. They have to be able to be maintained equally across that whole entire room. You can't have this room, this part of the room warmer, so they have to be able to move the heat equally to make sure this stuff doesn't overheat and melt. Plus humidity. If you get to the humidity too low, you end up with static electricity, and then you end up with things arcing. Unacceptable for service rooms. There are manufacturers that build equipment specifically for server rooms, and the bigger the building and the company you have, the bigger these rooms are. And then let's also look at data storage. There's companies that specifically store data and maintain that information. When something goes to the cloud, it's not really the cloud, it's a data storage facility. Las Vegas has some of these. Some of my students have worked there, and they said, I can't tell you how this stuff works, but you would love it. There's so much energy efficiency and different ideas and technology that goes into this server equipment. You got to keep all that data equipment cool, and different companies have different ways that they want that done, and they spend different monies on new technology, but it's very secretive, very high clearance stuff. So this data storage is really important part of HVAC, as well as think about also these towers, radio towers, transmission towers. There's a lot of information and a lot of computer stuff in those. I've gone out where they give you a GPS coordinates and you drive up the side of a mountain, and then there's a old shipping container that's insulated and they got a refrigeration system inside keeping all that cool. All these cell phones, as they spread data across the country, those rooms are important as well. They're really essentially a type of server room. Also, let's look at lab and testing. This is a double factor. Lab and testing, get all this equipment and all this stuff that's being tested. Some things have to be tested at a variety of different conditions. Hey, this got to be tested at this low temperature. This has to be tested at this high temperature. This has to be tested at this humidity. And they need it at a constant so that they can redo and change these tests and have the same baseline data. So these labs and lab testing is a very important side of it. Keep the humidity precise in that room and be able to change it. They can take some of these labs and testing rooms and they can literally make it snow inside of these rooms, which is amazing. So being able to test tons of different products and at different conditions, but not only that, let's also think about these labs and testing for HVAC equipment. They have these standards. Hey, this system is going to be a certain SEER rating or efficiency rating, and we need to be able to test that equipment. So they have to set these rooms up so they maintain that certain temperature and testing standards for all the equipment, and then see what it's going to do in a variety of different conditions. The manufacturer says it'll do this, then they send it to a lab to prove it. Got a good friend of mine that worked in a lab and testing facility. He worked with wind tunnels. They're able to test exactly how much air comes through, different static pressures, and wind tunnels are amazing. I wish I had more time to spend with him, but wind tunnels for these lab and testing is absolutely awesome. Had one donated to a school, and the school got rid of it. I was so upset about that, but this is information. This is technology. These are careers that could be yours as well. Lab and testing, that's massive on its own. I can't even tell you all the different details. But also we have automotive. The automotive has its own certification, 609 certification. But also think about buses. Got a good friend of mine, he's brilliant, that he's an AC service specialist for buses. And buses have two kinds of system. The system's working while it's running, so when you get on a bus to go from point A to point B, that bus stays running. Giant compressors that's driven off the engine of these buses that keep that bus cool as it's driving. And also, you got these mansions, people that live in these buses, and you want to be comfortable. You spend a couple $1 million on a bus, you want to make sure the AC is working right. And that my friend of mine, he actually found a flaw in some of these cooling systems and able to make some changes and do the design differences on it. And he's able to solve these problems for these buses, as well as also think about tour buses. You got all these bands that travel around the country. Get your favorite band, you're waiting outside. Those buses are plugged in and they have a separate refrigeration system that works to cool the bus. I know many times I've been called on a Friday night and a Saturday night, so that bus wasn't working right. They're inside playing and jamming out, and I'm on the bus trying to get their AC fixed, and sometimes you only get it fixed for temporary, and you're leaving notes of everything you did for the next guy at the next town, and you tell them, hey, I'm just getting it fixed enough so you can get to the next town and say, that's all we need. So buses has its own type of system that's involved. And then we have architecture. You got these people that design houses and design buildings. Well, they got to design the HVAC part of that as well. There's also engineering architects and simply architects, but some of the architects specialize in the HVAC equipment. They'll design a house and give it to a buddy of theirs that's an architect specifically for HVAC and they'll design the duct system. And sometimes the architect has to see so much stuff, sometimes they aren't always the greatest on HVAC side, and somebody has to come in and re-engineer that. But architecture has its own specialty in HVAC as well. The sugar industry, when you get the sugar that comes in here on your table, there is a whole lot that goes into that. I had the great opportunity of working for a sugar mill in Australia, and the amount of dehumidification, the temperatures that we had to maintain as that sugar had to be dried in different temperatures while it's being cooked. Sugar industry is absolutely incredible there in Australia, but there's a ton of HVAC that goes in that alone. Plus the labs, when they test the sugar to make sure it has the right consistency and the right whatever. One of my friends, she worked there at the lab, and we used to rescue birds, but she had all this little detailed information. And the more I understood about what she was doing, the easier it made my job in making sure the sugar was the right consistency as it went through the sugar dryer to the belt to be shipped off someplace. Also the environmental side of HVAC. Now we have very politically driven a lot of people, but still the environmental hazard is an important part. What's happening to our ozone layer? What's happening to the potential for global warming or the potential for climate change? And also the local environment. Where's that heat going? You don't want to take the heat out of the building and throw it into your neighbor, but also where that, what the conditions are. If we're using geothermal, the fluid that we're running into the earth, is that going to pollute a pond? Is it going to pollute the neighbor's system? So the environmental side of that's big, but also the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has their own division related to refrigerants and to making sure the manufacturers are doing right, making sure they're not manufacturing illegal refrigerant. There's tons of environmental sides. It's its own career that varies dramatically. And then we have building hygienist. It's like AAQ on a whole nother level. You can spend your whole career in just simply being a building hygienist, which is essentially a doctor for a building. You may have heard of sick building syndrome, but that's a real thing. These people solve that and also prevent that. You have a building, you're spending billions of dollars building and maintaining these buildings. You want to make sure that building is going to be healthy inside of it as well. So building hygienist, they're specialists that look at a whole lot of different aspects related to the HVAC side, but they got to look at the paint in the walls, the type of chairs that's inside, the people, the environment. So building hygienist is a really awesome part of the HVAC side, as well as building. Now we have also the LED certification. So when they're building these buildings, they got to make sure they're matching and reaching certain different standards. Sometimes they get a permit to build this building. It says, hey, it has to be X, Y, and Z environmental standards at a higher standard to be able to get this permit. So you got people that have to look at that as well. Also, building maintenance or building engineers. Once they build this building, you can't just be like, okay, we're done with it. It's got to be serviced and maintained. So building engineers usually start out with electrical and then learn HVAC, or they start out with HVAC and learn electrical, or one of the two and then learn plumbing. But they have to understand the whole entire building. And HVAC has a ton of moving parts in it and a ton of electrical, and it also deals with refrigerant piping and drains. So you kind of have to know all electrical, plumbing, and HVAC at the same time. But those buildings are big. I got several friends that work for the building maintenance side of things, whether it's smaller buildings or big buildings. That building maintenance is huge. A building's life can be cut short very quickly if it's not maintained very well. Humidity inside of that building is going to be a very big issue. If you don't have the right humidity in the building, you end up with a growth in there that may have to tear the whole entire building down. There's been houses that have been torn down before because they had mold issues. And then also energy recovery ventilators. As we take air, polluted, stagnant air from inside of a building or house out, we bring outside air back in to replenish it. We're also losing a lot of energy. So people specialize in energy recovery ventilators, how they recapture some of that heat that's being moved. And then you have people that specialize in ice. That's a cool job. They specifically specialize in ice. We talked about ice rinks, but also different types of ice makers, shaved ice and cubed ice, and all the different brands of ice makers. You figure some of these seafood companies, when they come in, they got massive, humongous ice machines that dump it out. There's ice plants that make different types of ice. But ice is its specialty and its own career within it. You can specialize in just one particular brand of ice machines and still have so much more to learn. So ice machines have its own specialty, whether it's restaurant systems over to ice plants or whatever. There's tons that go into ice. And also soda systems. I got a friend of mine who works on soda systems. He went through school, learned the HVAC side. He specializes in soda systems. Loves his job, has a great career, long-term pay, retirement. So soda systems has its own refrigeration side of it as well. If you've ever taken one of those soda machines apart where you put your drink in, there's a lot of technology that goes into those systems, how they cool those lines and how they keep that soda the right temperature. There's a lot that goes into soda. Military military specialists. Those are a big one too. A lot of students will retire from the military and they'll use some of their funding to go through school, and then they end up going back to the military as a specialist for refrigeration. The military outsources a whole lot of their stuff, and a lot of this military stuff is very top secret or certain secret clearances. Well, a lot of my students that will have these military clearances can go land those jobs because they're already ready there. You also got to think of different embassies. Country A has an embassy in country B. Well, they don't want to rely on country B to repairing their HVAC systems because they may be planting bugs or listing devices or who knows what else. So country A will send their own technicians out to the embassy at country B to do their own work on it. So embassies is really cool. I've looked into doing that, but military specialist, part of HVAC, a lot of top secret stuff. There's a special unnamed military base not too far from Las Vegas in the desert. It's got some really top secret stuff in it, but that's, you got a special clearance, and you know they're gonna have refrigeration as well. Different types of travel positions where people travel the country solving problems that other people can't solve, or doing training other people can't do, or flying to some islands to do very specific work. There was a possibility for a job opening in Antarctica that I considered. Then I realized, man, I don't like less heated conditions. But even in Antarctica, they need very precise refrigeration. So there's tons of different travel positions and remote positions and temporary positions in HVAC. Filtration is a huge part of HVAC, making sure the air has been filtered and cleaned. And there's so much more. People say, hey, what filter should I use? Well, there's a lot more goes into filtration than just this filter. People will say, hey, this filter for everything, but really the air that goes through the filter. We're going to be doing special classes on just filtration and airflow, but air, the filter side of it's a big part of it. Dehumidification is a big one as well. I got a friend of mine, Miss Kruger, in humidification. She's a dehumidification specialist. She knows so much about it. It just blows my mind every time I talk to her about the building science and the humidification and dehumidification. It's just incredible. And dehumidification goes bigger than just your house dehumidifying. Also commercial buildings and also manufacturing. They get the humidity just right. So dehumidification is a very big part of HVAC. And also we have duct cleaning systems. Duct cleaning has some great benefits for duct cleaning when it's done right. There's also a lot of people that give duct cleaning a really, really bad name and actually take advantage of people. But duct cleaning is a specialty within HVAC as well. I know that I've missed out a bunch of other stuff. This is all I could think of on the top of my head. So if you're a career specialist and you think of some other thing that I missed, please tell me, write it in the comments so that as people look at this and think, what do they want to do in HVAC, they can see this and have an idea, but also what you see in it. And if you are doing any one of these things, write the things you love or you hate in the comments so that as people look at this career, they can see the other things they may want to do. And HVAC is so big, I love it because there's always more to do. You can start out at any one point and then add to it, add to it, add to it, add to it. Or you can spend your whole entire life in one specific point. You get to decide what you want to do, but it's a huge career and it's always changing. I want to thank my friend Young HVAC. He had the idea of doing this a year ago. We were going to do it together and we never got around to doing it. I called and said, hey, is it all right if I do this video? Because I think it's going to be real important. He let me do it. Coming up with this idea a year ago. Leave me a comment and tell me what you love about these positions or something I missed, because there's so much more than just this. Think of HVAC. It's a big, cool career.